All right, guys, welcome to a new series. I am pumped to bring you, as this would indicate up here at the top, exercise review is what this is all about. This is the first video kind of explaining the series. So kind of going through all the videos after that, like what's basically the system that I'm using, what are some of the things that I'm looking at, and I'm sure this might change and evolve over time, but I'm really pumped to bring this to you. I've had some ideas for a long period of time. And honestly, technology's kind of caught up with some of the stuff that I want to do. So I'm really excited to bring you guys this stuff. So let's just go through this real quick to explain what this is about, some of the common points. This, first and foremost, is to simplify the seemingly overcomplicated stuff. It's always kind of been like this in the industry where I think, 10 years ago, is having people not too focused on just the meathead, just lift heavy and all that kind of stuff. So some education was needed. And now it feels like we've swung so far in the other direction where a lot of normal people are like, I just want to lift weights and get big. What exercises should I use? What shouldn't I use? What's the best path? And some people I think are intentionally or unintentionally, I don't really know, overcomplicating stuff. So my goal with all this stuff is to try and teach it at a level where it's not treating you guys like idiots, but also at the same time making it understandable. And I always say the little asterisks I get for that, which I think is hilarious, is you still do get some people that combat, and come and just, hey, just lift heavy and eat big, and that's all you need to do. And I don't technically disagree with any of that sentiment. The most important thing for getting huge is going to be adherence and work ethic, right? So that's just should supersede absolutely everything else. Because again, it doesn't matter how much you know, if you're literally going to the gym and have to get your protractor out and you're squeezing your pink dumbbells, you're never going to get big. So absolutely, some dumb meathead that has great work ethic and great adherence will get bigger than the super duper nerd. All that being said, knowledge doesn't equate to not working hard, right? And I got some examples here where I'm thinking about some of the greatest athletes of all time, MJ, Tom Brady, Tiger. If you go and dig around, some of these guys will analyze every single thing about the mechanics of their swing or their throw or whatever it is down to the nth detail, where it's like, why wouldn't you want a better understanding of how something works that's important to you? And none of that took away from their work ethic. So if you have work ethic, if you're not lazy, that's not going anywhere. And just having a deeper understanding of things will only add value to you and to your training. And the same thing, I use the NASCAR. I thought that was a good one where it's like, I'm pretty sure most of these guys that drive cars have some idea of how the car itself functions. It's like, I don't know, just push the gas and turn the wheel and everything works out fine. So again, having more knowledge of the mechanics of a car, having more knowledge of the mechanics of your swing doesn't make you throw shorter, drive slower, hit the ball shorter, whatever it is. So again, knowledge doesn't make people lazy. Lazy people make themselves lazy from being lazy. And then really all the goal of all this is really about hopefully helping you make better gym decisions as well too. And look at things overall less emotionally, realizing things aren't really about good or bad or right or wrong. I really want to give you guys just some pretty stuff you really can't argue as far as some basic physics. I have in there physics don't lie. As far as here's where it's loaded, this range of motion. If this is pulling this way, what muscle pulls against that? So again, really trying to simplify stuff with the things we pretty much know for sure. The thing you're not gonna have me saying a whole lot is here's the guaranteed outcome. So if I review an exercise and I say, hey, this is a very good exercise, or this might be something to consider with all this, it doesn't mean, hey, you do this and that body part's instantly gonna be huge. There's so many factors that go into it. But after you watch the video, hopefully you'll just have a better understanding of like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. When people talk about this range of motion thing and this profile thing. And again, one of the biggest things here is I want you guys to be able to see it. So I kind of put in here, I don't know if this is patting myself on the back or whatever. I don't take compliments well. I'm kind of weird like that. But I have one compliment that I took very well in my career. Tom Purvis, I consider my mentor, creator of resistance training specialist, probably the smartest mechanics guy in our industry, that 99% of the stuff that you're seeing out there is stolen from him. And if you're seeing something wrong, it's because someone bastardized the thing that they stole from him. But he once gave me a compliment where I was saying, we were going over some complicated stuff and some things that I was still trying to get my head wrapped around or whatever. And he basically said, you know what, Joe, like don't worry about that stuff. I got a million people that come through the course that can memorize all these numbers, but they get into the gym and they just can't see it. So they can't see like, oh, well, how do you make an adjustment to make it heavier here or lighter here? Or how do I make this adjustment for things to line up better? And he basically gave me the compliment that I see that stuff. And that stuff, honestly, there was a part of that just kind of came a little bit naturally to me. And then some of it, when I gained a deeper understanding of stuff, when I go and look in the gym, I can very quickly, again, see how if we move this here, move that there, how those adjustments will play out, on the trained muscle, the trained joint, whatever it is. And so this is where I kind of said technology's caught up with me a little bit, is I want you guys to see that stuff. And I've always been kind of limited by my ability to draw stick figures, maybe not see it in real life or see it on a real person. So you're going to see in this series, you're going to get some things to hopefully visually make a lot of these things very, very clear. And then I have what I'm going to do is kind of like a rating system. I know a lot of people do this where it's kind of like, let's rate an exercise where it's an A or it's a B or it's a 90% or it's a 10% or whatever it is. And so the purist in me doesn't like the whole rating system, as far as, again, that kind of goes in the category of things are good or bad. All that being said as well, I've been more of a novice of various subjects and have people explain to me the underlying mechanisms and all those causes and stuff, and I like to learn that. But there's sometimes I'm just like, hey, just tell me what to do. And I've been like that in other subjects. So I understand that in the training world, some people are just like, hey, just tell me what to do. So I'm going to do a rating system with basically what I'm going to go with is the green light, red light, yellow light system. And so the whole idea with that system is going to be, again, as the things would indicate, never really completely good or bad or right or wrong, but things where it's like, hey, this should be really good for a whole lot of people. Green light. Yellow light might indicate, okay, well, good for some people, but here's some considerations in here. And red light means, especially I'm thinking of the realm of this, if you're a trainer and you're prescribing things to other people, it's almost I would never use this, is kind of what the red light means. But this system never says don't do an exercise. So again, the reason to do a red light exercise, even if it's a red, doesn't really, for hypertrophy purposes, bring a whole lot to the table. You can say, well, I really enjoy this, Joe. That's a lot of fun. You do whatever you want. Having the idea of I want to go in the gym and have fun, and that's your reason, is an awesome reason. There's no sarcasm or joke behind that. I'm not walking through gyms judging people. That's my true thoughts on that. But if you're a trainer and we go through, hey, this really doesn't accomplish the training goal at all, and you're giving people these red light exercises, then I would say you better have a very, very good explanation for why you're doing that. And that being like, well, I really like it, doesn't really mean much for your client. So moving on, here's some of the categories that we're going to go through. And again, I might add this, tweak this, adjust this, but this is going to be kind of the framework for every single exercise. So first, we're going to go over some anatomy stuff. So again, if we're looking at an exercise, realize that the exercise was created for a goal. What is the goal? The goal should be to train a muscle. So we're going to get some basic idea of what joint or surrounding joints are involved with this muscle, one joint, sometimes multiple joints, and then really try and simplify stuff. I honestly feel like the mental gymnastics that some smart people try and do when talking about muscle function, looking at studies, like studies have so much value, looking at PubMed and seeing what the literature says, it has hardly, I don't want to say no value, but very, very not the best value when it actually comes to mechanics and exercise mechanics, because it's just this unwieldy, cumbersome thing. And all I mean by that is the example is you look at the lats and the shoulder joint, and someone will say, all right, well, what does the lats function in this plane? What does the lats function in this plane? Use all the different terms. And then it's like, because there's so much motion there, because the lat crosses over so many joints, people create all of these categories. And again, not that any of it in and of itself is wrong, but if you're just in the gym and you understand, hey, here's the joints this muscle crosses over, I can see one end, I can see the other end. What happens when I pull those 2 points together? And really simplify stuff to that. We're gonna go with hopefully some really cool stuff to show you some examples of that as well too. But again, instead of trying to learn 8,000 different planes and 8,000 different motions, just look to visually be able to see a muscle, understand origin insertion, understand some of the structural limitations, and just realize that all muscles do is create tension or force, bone to bone, whatever their attachments are. Origin to insertion, obviously bone to bone with a tendon in there in the middle as well too. And that's all you really need to know, especially for our training purposes. We're going to talk a little bit about alignment. And what's the point of this? Really two things is orthopedic concerns, meaning I do feel like some of this is very easy right away. You do an exercise, your shoulder hurts, stop doing it. Orthopedically, there's some acute issues there. So simple stuff like that. Then some of it is we're making educated guesses, right? I can't prove that an exercise will be bad for everyone's elbows, but I can say, hey, based on what I've seen, based on these principles, I feel like this exercise done over a long period of time, it might not even be something that happens in the first few months or first few years, might eventually lead to some long-term issues orthopedically. And then we talk about biasing tissue. So this is something that gets kind of, again, like a lot of things beat up in the industry. And so some people will say biasing tissue is a complete waste of time. If we just press and everything gets big. And there's some truth to that. I think some people are trying to get a little too fancy with what they're biasing. But the reality is, like, look at your delt as a perfect example, right? So if I take my arm out here, all the heads of the delt have the same insertion. But someone wouldn't say, I don't think, that you just push or have force going any direction and it's not going to bias tissue differently, right? So if I have my rear delt here, or excuse me, if I have my delt here and I push on something this way, obviously it's a good position for my front delt to work. What if I push the complete opposite direction, 180 degrees the opposite direction? Well, that's going to be good for my rear delt to work. So even though they're all moving the humerus, even though they all have the same shared insertion, by moving the line of force in the plane that we're creating load in, you can obviously bias different tissue. Now again, the delt's a kind of a more drastic example of that, but that does exist with some other fan-shaped muscles like pecs, maybe even glutes, lats a little bit. So there is something to biasing tissue, as long as you don't go super nerd and go overly extreme and think that's really like, hey, I can grow just this part of my glute by having this cuff and cable and rotating nonsense. And then we're going to talk about profiles and range of motion. So we're going to link, if Brady can do it right, up here somewhere, a video that I've done in the past on torque, moment arms, and force. That's probably, you guys are going to hear me talk a little bit about torque and moment arms. And that's, you know, that's for the sake of accuracy. It's a little bit nerdy. A whole lot of other stuff I keep relatively simple, but you have to have some basic understanding of that. And you'll hear me try and use some words sometimes synonymously. I try and do that to keep things simple. But if I'm talking about, you know, motion, let's talk about a curl, for example. So sometimes if I'm talking about, you know, you have a 30-pound dumbbell in your hand, you know, it's always 30 pounds. The load technically never changes during the curl, but the torque at your joint changes. So again, how hard or heavy it feels as far as your muscle's concerned changes as you go through the range of motion. The thing that creates that change is moment arms. So again, most people can realize, hey, down here it's easy to do a curl here, right here it's hard. That's because of this distance. A moment arm is a distance. And as you come back up here, it gets easier. So again, that's just one example. Sometimes I'll talk about, use synonymously the word hard or load, where I'll say a curl is hardest or most loaded here, which really isn't accurate. But if I'll say torque really to be more accurate, but then some people get upset about me saying that. So that's the one nerd alert. If you want to follow along, watch that video. It's an older video. I might redo it at some point in time, but it's still a good video, just giving you kind of a 101 on that. And I do think that's very important because, again, your muscles don't just handle load. That's half of what they handle. They handle torque at joints. And torque is made up of both moment arm and load, and that's the actual equation. And so again, stuff I kind of gave you an example there of how would you manipulate loading patterns and stuff. Again, another example of that, if I do a dumbbell lateral raise, everybody knows it's hard here, but it's easy here. Why is that? It's a result of the line of force in the moment arms. If I do a cable lateral raise with the cable going this way, everyone knows it's actually hard here, and then a little bit easier here. So again, you don't even have to have a degree to know any of that. So it's just, but even though it's the exact same motion, so both whether I have something in my hand or not, whether the cable's this way, the dumbbell is coming this way, the range of motion is the same, the actual joint motion is exactly the same, but that direction of the line of force and moment arms is what makes it change as far as where it feels hard at different points in the range of motion. We're going to talk a little bit about, so again, that's loading patterns, again, how to adjust those. We're going to talk a little bit about, you know, muscle length and range of motion train. So that kind of goes in with the anatomy a little bit. So if we're doing an exercise, we'll talk about what is this muscle's range of motion. Some of that is like a muscle can go through its near full length change depending on the joints that it crosses over. Sometimes it's limited a little bit by joint, but we'll discuss range of motion a little bit as well too. And then kind of talk in the category of like, what are my biases here? Hopefully some of this makes sense. I want things that align well. So that's part of giving a good rating. I want profiles. My bias here is I still think at this point in time, you want things that train and load a muscle through their mid and lengthened ranges. Those are what you prioritize in your training. I did not say that you shouldn't train the shortened range. I still think you should train it. And again, if you're going to have, you know, more than 3 exercises for a body part, maybe why wouldn't you train the shortened position as well too? But again, based on stuff that I've been saying for 10 years, I didn't learn myself, based on what I know and what we seem to know about the length-tension relationship, I think the mid and lengthened ranges are where you can produce the most intramuscular force. So that's my bias. And the literature now, and if you listen to the nerds, is kind of leaning more towards just the lengthen. I don't think the literature really says just the lengthen is better than the mid-range. That's my opinion. Tell me I'm wrong in the comment section. But either way, it's almost a pointless argument because I think you should train a muscle through where it's near fully lengthened mid-range. Most of the time, it's the same exercise. So an example would be a press, chest press. Great exercise for overloading the pecs where they're lengthened and through their mid-range. Why argue? Just prioritize your presses during your chest training. So that's some of the ones there. And lastly, we're going to go over a couple ones. Bracing, stability, reference point, complexity. What's all that nonsense? Look at this graphic. I did this myself. See that? Did that all by myself. I'll get back to that in a minute. But so one of the last categories, bracing, stability, reference point, complexity. I put that whole mouthful in there because people mix all those up. And I'll kind of go through those all really briefly. But But bracing is your ability to push into something in direct opposition to the load, to the point that balancing or having to maintain not falling over or be pushed by the load itself is the limiting factor. And so an example of that would be a chest press with or without a back pad. So again, if I'm doing a chest press standing with cables, how much load can I do? You might be able to do pretty much, but if you're ridiculously strong at chest pressing, especially if you don't weigh that lot, eventually it becomes a balancing act. So you having to maintain your center of mass, this is why people look like Spider-Man sometimes when they're doing that in the gym, where if you just look like if you just put a back pad behind you and did it on a bench, not only would you have less to manage, I guarantee, and this is from having done this a billion times, the load you can handle goes heavier. Another example I give is like the back pad on a leg press. If you took the back pad off of a leg press, how much could you leg press? Not nearly as much. But where everyone kind of jumbles all these together, there's a component of stability. So this is where, you would say unstable exercises really aren't great. And this could be something as simple as where there's a balancing act, where people actually use balance implements like, foam things and balls and all that kind of stuff. Reference point I throw in here as well too, and I'll give an example. This would be like doing like a chest pad for rear delts. So if I'm doing cable rear delts, the amount of load that I'm using is very, very limited pulling me that way. I don't really need something to push into, but sometimes I'll have people have a chest pad just so they can actually feel, is my chest coming off or on the pad? You don't actually need it to push into, but sometimes it's nice to have there just to make sure that I'm not doing this. And there's a whole bunch of examples and exercises where a reference point can be nice for form as far as making sure that the stuff that shouldn't be moving is moving, and all the motion is coming from the stuff that is moving. And then there's a component of complexity in here. So one of the most specific things here is, Olympic lifting. And again, if someone goes from being able to snatch 50 pounds to being able to snatch 300 pounds, will something grow? Yes, something will grow. Does that mean it's a good exercise for hypertrophy? No, because at some point in time, we want this idea of specificity. We want not just one, is it fine that everything grows a little bit with a snatch? When you snatch, what grows? Everything. But at some point in time, we want more specificity, and we want specificity without fatigue. Because again, if you're doing this whole snatch thing, then it's like, does that technically work your quads? Yeah, but what if I want my quads to get bigger without everything else getting tired? And also it literally just being a skill. The more complexity involved, the more it becomes actually like a sport or literally like a skill, where some of the limiting factor is how good are you at actually doing that thing. And so again, in general, we want things that are more braced, and that's great first and foremost for loading. So again, ultimately, you don't want ever any limit in the load that you can use on an exercise. You want theoretically that to be unlimited. You don't want other stuff to fatigue. So again, if I have to use, my shoulder joint to stabilize a curl and I'm feeling my shoulder before my bicep, maybe using something to brace against would be a good option there. And then again, reference points, just a form thing, and complexity is there's a scale there, right? So there's no real tipping point of here's perfect with less complexity, here's the no-no, at the end we kind of put Olympic lifting. There's not really a point where it's a cutoff. It again, kind of comes back into that, this rating system with the lights is who is this for? This is why the easy target for, the average Mr. or Mrs. Jones client doing CrossFit pretty much makes no sense unless they enjoy the sport of Olympic lifting. That's why it's called Olympic lifting. It's in the Olympics. It is a sport. But if someone just wants to lose 10 pounds, get some abs, makes absolutely no sense, in my opinion, for everything else that it brings to the table, aside from a little muscle stimulus and a little calorie burn. That's another side rant for another day. And then another factor that I'll consider in here as well too is accessibility. And so meaning, here's my little example here. If I say, hey, here's this barbell exercise, that's great, because barbells are pretty much something a lot of people have access to, even in your garage. Cables, then we go, not everyone has that, maybe in a garage gym. That's something we might actually go to a gym. Or if I say, hey, a pendulum squat's awesome, but it's like, man, that sucks. My gym doesn't have a pendulum squat. Not a whole lot of gyms do. So that'll be a factor in this kind of rating system as well too, where again, sometimes people will kind of poo-poo, oh, all barbell stuff, whatever. And it could be pretty darn good on paper for all these things, but can also be awesome because everybody has it. And everyone might not have this rowing machine that's heavy in this part and light in this part or whatever. And then ultimately, like I said, I kind of already went into this, we'll get into the rating system, where again, I will rate every exercise with the idea of some people that say, hey, Joe, you went through all this stuff. That's really neat. Big words, nerd, nerd, nerd. But just tell me, should I do the exercise or should I not do the exercise? And so that's pretty much what I'm going to go through with the rating system is meaning green light. Vast majority of the people watching who will go over the muscle that it trains, kind of what the goal of the exercise is going to be a very good option. And again, obviously, like I said, yellow might have some considerations. And red is, again, might be Olympic lifting. Hey, if you enjoy it, I might rate snatch a red as far as an option to grow your quads or whatever it is. But it might be fun for you, have at it. But if you're a trainer and Mrs. Jones says, hey, I want to lose some weight, or hey, I want, a nicer butt, I might say, well, snatch is probably not the best option for all the things listed, but you better have a very, very good reason for having her do it. So that's the overview. I'm very, very excited to have this series. The first video that I'm actually doing, I took a poll somewhere and saw what were some of the exercises people had the most questions about, and this was a top one. But now's your opportunity to give me some down in the comments. So I will go every single video and say, hey, what do you guys want to see next? I will go through it in a very similar manner that obviously I covered here, and it'll be led a lot by you. So if you look down that comment section, you don't see your exercise, write it in there. If you see some, or you see an exercise that someone else already did, and you say, hey, I want that, give it a little thumb or heart or whatever is all down there that you can, so we can bump that to the top, and I'll know which ones are top priorities. And I think you guys are gonna enjoy what I have in store here. And as always, if you're looking for ways to support the channel, look at the link in the description down below, or links. And my app is awesome, kind of biased, but looking for some more education, workouts, all that good stuff. Or you're looking for some apparel, sweet t-shirt or something else, go check out all that stuff down below. And as always, don't forget to do the YouTube thing. Like, subscribe, follow, share. Appreciate you guys.